Andrea from South Dakota wrote asking if I could address economic systems from a more systemic perspective. She called me out for not talking about capitalism and socialism in my discussing of polarities. Andrea has a good point. I suspect one of the reasons I didn't directly address the topic is that economics is not my strong suit, but it is one of the areas where historically we've seen greatest social and political polarization. Culturally mature systemic perspective can at least help with reflections of a very big picture sort. Right off, such perspective presents us with a couple of questions. First, how do we best understand the capitalism versus socialism polarity as a polarity? And second, is there a more complete and encompassing way to think about economics? I'm going to suggest that if we can successfully answer these questions, we can make most any kind of economic system work going forward. And I suspect the reverse is also true, that if we would not effectively answer these questions, no kind of economic system will be able to save us. What most immediately stands out for me when I look at this polarity through a creative systems lens is how directly it reflects how creative systems theory frames polarity at its most basic. The theory proposes that polarity at its most fundamental reflects not opposing positions as we usually think of them, but difference and distinction on one hand with unity and oneness on the other. It goes on to describe how the workings of polarity understood in this way are key to our audacious tool-making, meaning-making prowess. Capitalism in its pure form puts its faith in distinction, in individualism, competition, and material values. Socialism, as pure ideology, puts its faith in connectedness, in centralized determination, and a sharing of resources. By itself, this recognition would not seem to help us a lot. It supports the conclusion that we often find when we apply a systemic lens, that the differences we experience have as much to do with how we think as what we think. However, as far as reconciling differences, it would seem only to support that conflict might be expected, and conflict of a deep sort. But culturally mature perspective suggests that we can find at least limited reassurance in this basic recognition if our traditional polarized and polarizing economic ideologies reflect right and left hands of a larger systemic reality, then cultural maturity's cognitive reordering should bring with it the ability to think in more systemic and complete ways. This kind of stepping back at least helps us begin to appreciate that we find basic kinds of contributions implied in both of these ideological extremes. In any living system, competition and cooperation each have a place, both within systems and between systems. Indeed, we would not have life if were not for this ongoing two-handed interplay. Creative systems theory patterning concepts let us go further and map how we find different balances of competitive and cooperative forces at different points in the development of systems, and also with different kinds of systems. If we want to get beyond thinking only in terms of approaches and ideologies, we need first to ask why we have economic systems in the first place. We need to start with what creative systems theory calls the question of referent. The basic answer: we have them because, as ways of handling the exchange of resources, they provide support for things that we value. And we can't stop there. creative systems theory alerts us to the importance of a further question. Is what we value changing? I've argued here that it is, and in ways that have profound consequences. In an earlier episode, I addressed the importance of revisiting what we mean by advancement, of rethinking wealth and progress. When we engage economics question of reference in this way, we find a provocative conclusion. Looking to the future, attempting to choose between warring economic systems misses the point. Ultimately, what we need to be asking about is values. Address values more systemically, and developing systems that can support them could come pretty naturally. It's a task we began to take on in that previous episode that looked specifically at advancement. There, I described how, when I want to help somebody address this question, I will often first engage the person at a personal level. I will ask them to talk with me about what creates meaning, wealth in the largest sense, in their individual lives. Most people mention money, but most recognize that beyond a certain point, money stops being significant in the same sense. Invention, too, most always has a place. People like their gadgets. But most people appreciate that other things are ultimately as important, or often much more important. One's family, one's friends, one's community, one's felt relationship with nature, one's health, one's creativity, one's intellectual pursuits. I observed that people doing this exercise are often surprised to find that a significant mismatch exists between what they have described as most important for a meaningful life and many of their day-to-day choices. And I noted that I often engage people in a related kind of inquiry with regard to how collectively we define wealth and progress. People tend to come up with lists that are very similar, both in being more encompassing and in better reflecting more basic needs. The fact that current world priorities reflect a related kind of mismatch becomes hard to escape. Too often today we apply an outmoded definition of advancement that excludes much that is in fact most important to us. I observed how taking our modern age definition beyond its timeliness threatens to leave us irreparably distanced from much that most ultimately matters to us. Pundits commonly turn to economic explanations when they attempt to provide answers. This is when it comes to phenomena of any sort. This should not surprise us, given how modern age understanding tends to reduce truth to the material. With economics being at one level complex and easily overwhelming, we easily fail to ask more deeply whether these explanations really hold up. But if what I'm suggesting is accurate, in the end, economics is about values. It's about willing to look deeply at what most matters to us. And more specifically, for our time, it needs to be about what most matters to us as we look to the future. At that level, the questions we need to ask are straightforward, simply part of our needed new common sense. If we get the values right, I suspect that many different kinds of economic systems could be made to work. Doing so could also open the door to developing whole new ways of thinking about economic systems. I hope that at least begins to answer Andrea's question.